The wine was the color of crushed garnets, and Ilara should have known better than to trust the hand that kept filling her glass. But she didn't, because the hall was warm, and the music was sweet, and the moon hung fat and low over the Alpha Council's great gathering, and for one night, just one, she wanted to feel like she belonged among the shining people who never looked at her twice. "More, sister," Vespera's voice. Honey poured over a blade. Ilara looked up at this woman who shared her father's blood, but none of his warmth. Vespera was smiling. That smile. The one that never reached her eyes, the one Ilara had spent her whole life learning to fear, without ever being able to say why. "I think I've had enough," Ilara murmured. "Nonsense. The glass already filling. It's a night of celebration. Drink. It'll do you good." And Ilara drank. Because it was easier than arguing. Because her tongue already felt heavy and strange in her mouth, and the candlelight had started to smear at the edges like wet paint. She didn't know yet what was in the cup. She didn't know that the ritual wine, the sacred lunar draught, the elders poured every year. The one whispered to loosen the mind and open the roads of fate had been touched by something darker. A herb. Moon herb, they called it. The kind that stole a person's reason and handed it to whoever was standing close enough to take it. She didn't know her own sister had put it there. All she knew was that the floor had begun to move. Ilara pressed a hand to her forehead. Beads of sweat there. The laughter around her was too loud and too far away all at once, folding in on itself, warping like sound heard from underwater. "I need air," she said to no one. She rose, gripped the table's edge. Every step across that gleaming hall felt like walking the deck of a ship in a storm, and she clutched her skirts and prayed no one would notice the way she swayed. And that's when she hit him, a wall of a man. Broad shoulders, dark hair, and the two of them stumbled together, each grabbing the other to keep from falling. "Careful." His voice came out slow, deeper than it meant to be. Ilara looked up, and the air left her lungs entirely. I was tall, absurdly, impossibly tall, with a jaw carved from something harder than flesh, and eyes the blue of a winter sky at dusk. But it wasn't just the face. It was the way he looked at her. Like she'd struck him somewhere he didn't know he could be struck. He blinked slow, fighting to focus. "Are you all right?" Except his own voice betrayed him. He wasn't all right either. "The wine," he said the words thick. "There's something wrong with this wine. You drank it too. Too much." A low, humorless laugh. "Far more than I should have." And so they stood there. Two people undone by the same poison leaning into each other, because neither could stand alone. The hall spun around them. The music bent. And somewhere in the fog of it, he decided she needed water, and she decided she trusted him. And the two of them stumbled from that hall together, up the stairs, down the empty corridors of the royal wing, where every servant had been called away to serve the feast. No one saw them go. No one. What happened after came to Ilara later only in pieces. A room lit by moonlight. A pitcher of water. His hand shaking too badly to pour it. Her fingers on his face telling him he was beautiful. His voice rough, begging her not to say things like that in a room like this. And then the pieces dissolved into warmth and skin, and the desperate feeling of two lost people holding on to the only solid thing in a world that had come loose from its moorings. Neither of them chose it. Not really. Not with clear eyes. That's the part no one would ever let her say. Morning came like a blade through the window. Ilara woke with her head pounding and a stranger's warmth beside her, and it took 3 full seconds for the horror to arrive. A man, on his back, dark hair spilling across the pillow, his face turned away, half-lit and unknowable. Gods. She was up before she could breathe, clutching the sheet to her chest, snatching her scattered clothes from the floor, with hands that would not stop shaking. She had to go. Now. Before he woke. Before anyone saw. Before the whole world learned what the daughter of Lord Bramwell had done. She looked back at him once. She wanted some foolish, aching part of her wanted to see his face. To know him. To keep him. But he stayed turned away. And Ilara ran. She ran through the empty corridor, and down the great stairs, and out into a dawn that struck her face like cold water, and her heart would not slow. And one question chased her the whole way home. What did I do? She had lost her honor, given it to a stranger. And the cruelest part, the part she buried so deep she nearly forgot it herself, was that some small traitorous corner of her did not regret it. 8 months, 8 long months, and Ilara sat before her mirror with a hand resting on a belly that could no longer be hidden by any dress in the world. The child moved beneath her palm, a small, insistent turning, a life she had built in the dark with a man whose face she could no longer picture, no matter how she tried. She had tried, for a while, squeezed her eyes shut, and reached for that night the way you reach for a dream that's already draining out of you. But there was only fog. Blue eyes, maybe. A deep voice. Hands. And then nothing she could hold. So she'd stopped trying. Because it was easier not to remember what you weren't allowed to grieve. The memory that never faded, though that one lived in her like a splinter. Her father. 3 months back in his study. Lord Bramwell behind that great oak desk, quill in hand, and Ilara's own voice trembling as she said the words she'd rehearsed 100 times. Father, I'm expecting a child. The silence after had teeth. He set down the quill. Slow, careful, as though if he moved too fast, the whole world might shatter. What did you say? I'm pregnant. And then, the storm. He rose so hard, his chair went over backward with a crack like a breaking bone, and the veins stood out in his neck, and his face went the color of old brick. You have lost your honor. Each word a hammer. You gave yourself to a man. Without marriage, without a name, without anything. It was a mistake, I didn't. And who is the father? She'd lowered her eyes. That was the answer. The silence was the answer. You don't know. His voice dropped, and somehow the quiet was worse than the shouting. You don't know who fathered your own child. There was something in the whine. I couldn't think. I couldn't. Do not come to me with excuses. His hand slammed the desk. You are a lady. It was your duty to guard yourself, to guard this house. And here is the thing Ilara would carry the rest of her life. He never once asked if someone had done this to her. He never once wondered whether his daughter had been a victim rather than a fool. Because it was easier for a proud man to have a shameful daughter than to admit his house had been infiltrated, poisoned, used. Shame he could manage. Shame he could hide behind loose dresses and quiet rooms. The truth would have required him to be brave. And Lord Bramwell Ilara had learned that Day was not a brave man. No man of worth will have you now, he'd said, finally sinking back into his chair, suddenly looking old. You will take whatever comes. Some widower, some pity match. Whatever mercy your ruin can still buy. Then quietest of all, leave my study. She had. And only when the door was shut behind her did she let herself sob. Elara blinked. The mirror again. The present. A knock. A maid arms full of ivory silk. "Lady Elara, your father asks that you wear this, for the ball tonight." Elara stared at the gown. Beautiful in its way. Soft and modest and cut loose to drape over the belly that no fabric on earth could truly hide. "He truly means to bring me," she said. Not a question. The maid hesitated. A girl, young, kind eyes. "Forgive me, my lady, but people will talk." A laugh escaped Elara, dry as dust. "People already talk. There is nothing left they can say that hasn't already been said." The maid lowered her gaze and slipped out, and Elara pressed the silk to her chest and understood exactly what her father was doing. He was desperate. The ball at the main castle. The great gathering, where the Alpha King would finally choose a queen, meant 100 noble houses under one roof. 100 chances. And Lord Bramwell, drowning in his own disgrace, would parade his ruined daughter through them all, in the mad hope that someone might take her. Anyone. Even an old man. Even out of pity. Anything to be rid of the stain she'd become. Elara put her hand on her belly. "It's you and me," she whispered. "Whatever they do tonight. It's just you and me, little one. And I will not let them make you feel a way they've made me feel. Not ever. Do you hear me?" The child turned as if in answer, and Elara, for the first time in 3 months, straightened her spine. Across the kingdom, in the high tower of the main castle, the Alpha King was refusing to be dressed for his own ball. "Tell the elders I'm not coming." "I've told them 4 times, Cassian." Torin leaned against the doorframe arms, crossed the scars on his forearms catching the light. Commander of the King's Guard. The only man in the whole world who called Cassian by his name, and lived. "They've stopped listening. There are noble women from 6 provinces already in your hall. If you don't appear, they'll marry you off to a portrait." "I'm 32 years old," Cassian said to the window to the gardens below. "I've led this kingdom through 2 wars and a plague, and they treat me like a stallion to be paired." "You are a stallion to be paired. It's in the job." Cassian didn't laugh, because there was only one thing on his mind, the same thing that had lived there for 8 months, refusing to leave, refusing to fade. Her. The woman from that cursed night. The one whose face he'd never seen clearly, whose name he'd never learned, whose hands on his skin had woken something in him that had lain dead his entire life. He'd sent men across every province, questioned every servant, traced every thread, and found nothing. Not a hair, not a whisper, as if she'd never existed at all, except she had. He knew she had, because he could still feel the exact weight of her fingers along his jaw, could still hear a soft voice telling him he was beautiful, could still remember in the marrow of him the single most bewildering feeling of his life, that for once he had found something worth keeping, and then woken to an empty bed and a scent already fading. "You're doing it again," Torin said quietly. "Doing what?" "Chasing a ghost." Cassian turned, and there was something raw in his face that made even Torin, who had stood beside him in the blood of battlefields, look away. "She's not a ghost. She was real. I held her." A muscle worked in his jaw. "I made myself a promise, Torin. I will not marry a woman chosen for me by bloodlines and politics. If I can't find her, then I'll marry no one who doesn't make me feel what she made me feel that night. And if that never comes," he looked back to the window, "then I'll die a king with no queen, and the elders can choke on it." Torin sighed the sigh of a man who had lost this argument many times. "The ball's at 8, he said. "Try not to make anyone cry before the second dance." The ballroom of the main castle was built to make mortals feel small. Crystal chandeliers dripped golden light from a ceiling so high it vanished into shadow. Tables draped in white linen groaned under wine and roasted things. And in the center, couples turned and turned to the sound of an orchestra, silk and jewels, and laughter. 100 beautiful people, all orbiting a single fixed star. The Alpha King. Cassian stood near his throne, ringed by elders who talked without breathing, and he wore his boredom like armor. Polite. Distant. His blue eyes swept the room the way a man scans an ocean for a ship that isn't coming. And into all of that, into that gleaming, cruel, glittering sea came Ilara. She saw him from across the hall. She had never stood so near the Alpha King before. The stories reached even her small corner of the world, the relentless strength of him, the leadership. No one questioned the stubborn refusal to take a wife, as if no bond were worthy of holding him. And here he was close enough to see. Tall, dark, a weariness in his shoulders that all his power couldn't hide. Something in her chest stirred, a pull, a recognition that made no sense at all. Foolish girl, she told herself. You're a ruined woman in a borrowed dress. He's the king of the world. Look away. Come, Ilara. Her father's hand at her elbow steering her not toward the light, but away from it, to a small table in the far corner, far from the throne, far from the music, far from anyone who mattered. Vespera, meanwhile, went straight for the center red silk and bare shoulders, gliding into the ring of noblewomen, already circling the king, like moths at a flame. And Ilara sat alone. And it began. The looks first, then the whispers issuing out like a tide. That's her. The pregnant one, the shameless one. Doesn't even know who the father is, they say. Slept with half the province, more like. What was Bramwell thinking, bringing that here? She ruined herself. Let her sit in it. The words came at Ilara like arrows, and each one found its mark, and she kept her eyes on her own hands folded over her belly, and thought, I will not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Give them nothing. But oh, it was hard. It was so hard. Because she was alone in a room full of people, and there is no loneliness in the world, quite like that one. Across the hall, Cassian was drowning in perfume. Another noble woman had approached the fourth. The fifth, dropping into a curtsy engineered to display everything. A curtsy could decently display. And Cassian nodded at her the way a man nods at weather. Then came Vespera. She approached with measured steps, a smile she'd clearly practiced in a mirror, and dipped lower than any woman before her had dared. Your Majesty. What joy to finally stand in your presence. Her fingers found his sleeve, light, deliberate. It must be so wearying, all this responsibility. You look like a man in need of someone who understands the weight you carry. Cassian looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. His eyes were cold as a frozen lake. I have no need of company at present, Lady. Vespera. Lady Vespera. And he stepped back, so her hand fell into empty air. She recovered. Barely. A flush climbing her throat as she retreated to where her mother stood watching Rowena draped in emeralds, her eyes moving over the room like a merchant counting coins. The two of them bent their heads together, and whatever passed between them, it was not kind. Your Majesty. An elder at Cassian's side, white-bearded, patient as stone. You must at least try. These young women crossed provinces to meet you. I didn't ask them to, but they are here, and the kingdom needs a queen. And Cassian was about to say something he'd regret when he heard it. Two voices close by, older women not bothering to lower their tongues. Did you see Lady Alara's here? The pregnant one. The disgrace doesn't even know the father. Slept with gods, know how many. Ruined her own life. Shameful thing to look at. And something in Cassian went very still. He turned toward the voices. Two matrons, jeweled and smug, and he followed their pointing gazes across the whole length of that glittering hall to a corner. To a table where a young woman sat entirely alone. Simple ivory dress. Dark hair black as a starless night, pinned low with a few strands loose about her face. Hands folded over a belly heavy with child. And even from this distance, even across all that gold and noise, Cassian could see it. The way she held herself. Braced. Shrinking. A person being erased in real time by a room that had decided she was nothing. No one spoke to her. No one went near. As if her misfortune were a thing that might spread. And Cassian felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Fury. Not the hot kind. The cold kind. The kind that knows exactly what it's looking at and cannot abide it. Because he had spent his life being told what a person was worth based on bloodline and reputation and the gossip of jeweled fools. And here was a room doing exactly that to a woman who could not even lift her eyes. No one deserves that, he thought. No one. Least of all a woman carrying a child. And beneath the fury, quieter stranger, came something else. Something he couldn't name. Because looking at her, at the dark hair, the bowed head, the loneliness of her, something in his chest turned. Some deep, wordless thing, like a key trying a lock in the dark. Do I know her? He didn't. He couldn't. He'd have remembered a face like, except he couldn't see her face. She hadn't lifted it. Where are you going? Torin materializing at his shoulder as Cassian began to move. To do something that should have been done a long time ago. And the Alpha King crossed his own ballroom, straight-hand. Certain, past the shocked faces of 100 nobles straight toward the table, in the corner, where the disgraced woman sat alone. Elara was staring at her hands when the shadow fell over her. She lifted her eyes, slow, braced for another cruelty, and her heart stopped. The Alpha King, here, standing before her, close enough to touch. Those winter blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole every thought from her head. He's looking at me. The Alpha King is looking at me. Why is he? What does he? Oh gods, what have I done? Now, what did I? He leaned down. Close. So close that only she could hear. Pretend the baby is mine. 5 words. Elara blinked, certain she'd misheard, certain the wine of shame had finally cracked her mind clean open. What? He drew back just an inch, but his eyes never left hers. You heard me. And then he did the impossible. He held out his hand. Come with me. Now. Elara stared at the king's outstretched hand, as though it were a thing from a dream. Her heart hammered so hard, she was certain he could hear it. Is this a trick? Some cruelty dressed up as kindness? Why would he? I don't understand. She began. The word died. Cassian tilted his head, patient, his voice dropping lower still. Trust me. A breath. Please. And there was something in that single word that please. from a man who surely never had to ask anyone for anything that reached past all her fear and took hold of something underneath it. She didn't understand it. She would never fully understand it. But she put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, and he drew her to her feet, and the entire ballroom froze. Every conversation died mid-word. Every head turned, 100 faces, and every single one of them staring at the same impossible thing. The Alpha King, holding the ruined woman's hand. The whispers exploded like a dropped tray of glass, but Cassian ignored all of it. He tucked her hand against his arm, kept her close, kept his grip firm and sure, and he walked her through that sea of stunned nobility with his chin high and his eyes forward, daring anyone, to say a word. Ilara's legs shook with every step. She could feel the stairs crawling over her skin. She caught a glimpse of Vespera's face as they passed, twisted white, a mask of pure fury and disbelief, and of Rowena beside her, her calculating calm cracked wide open at last. And her father, Lord Bramwell, standing frozen among the elders, mouth open, unable to comprehend what his own eyes were showing him. "Where are we going?" Ilara managed, barely a breath. "Somewhere we can talk," Cassian said without looking back. He led her from that hall of glittering knives down a side corridor away from the noise until they reached a door of dark wood. He opened it, drew her inside, and closed it behind them. An office, a study, a great desk in the center walls lined with books, a fire throwing dancing shadows across the room. He let go of her hand. Ilara took a step back, wrapped her arms around her belly. Every instinct she owned braced for the catch, the price, the cruelty that surely hid inside this strange mercy. "Why did you do that?" Her voice came out shaking. Cassian leaned back against the desk, studied her with those piercing eyes. "Because you needed help." A pause. "And because I need a favor." She blinked. "A favor? From me?" "Yes." He crossed his arms. "What is your name?" "Ilara. Lady Ilara." "Lady Ilara." He said it slowly, as if testing the weight of it on his tongue. Something flickered across his face, there and gone. "How far along are you?" Heat climbed her neck. 8 months. He nodded. Some private calculation moving behind his eyes. "And the father?" The question landed like a blow. Ilara's gaze dropped to the floor. Shame closed its old familiar hand around her throat. "I don't know who he is." Silence. And when she finally found the courage to look up, braced for the disgust she'd learned to expect from every face in the world, she found none. None at all. Only something that looked impossibly like understanding. Cassian ran a hand through his dark hair and let out a long breath. "I can only imagine how hard this has been for you," he said, and his voice was softer now. "To be treated like that, by a room full of people who know nothing about you." Ilara did not know what to say, because in 8 months, through her father's fury and her stepmother's poison and a whole province's contempt, not one single soul had said those words to her. Not one. "The elders have been at my throat for months." Cassian went on, pushing off the desk, moving to the tall window, as if he needed the space to think. "Demanding I marry. They built this whole absurd spectacle to force me to choose a wife from a lineup of strangers. And what has that to do with me?" He turned. "I don't want any of those women out there. I don't want a queen chosen for me by politics and bloodlines." A step toward her. But they won't accept a simple refusal. Not this time. Not unless I give them a reason they cannot argue with. Ilara felt the shape of it forming. Slow. Impossible. You want the world to believe the child is yours. Yes. But why? You could have any woman in that hall. I don't want any woman in that hall. His voice was iron. There is someone I'm looking for, and until I find her, I will not marry anyone. But if I claim a child, if I claim you, then the elders have their heir, and I have my time. Time to keep searching. I can drag out an engagement for months, invent delays, postpone the ceremony a dozen ways. He's looking for someone, Ilara thought. And a strange cold thread pulled tight in her chest, one she had no right to feel, one she shoved down hard. And me, she said instead. When you find this woman, when you no longer need me, what happens to me then? Cassian stopped in front of her. So close she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. You'll have everything you need, he said. A home to raise your child, far from the gossip and the cruelty. Freedom from your family. Protection. Wealth. Your child recognized as noble as mine, with every door in the kingdom open to them. His voice dropped. And when the arrangement ends, you walk away with all of it. Free to live however you choose. No one will ever call you ruined again. It was too much. It was everything. A future. A shield. A life for her child that did not begin in shame and end in some old man's pity. Ilara looked down at her belly, at the child turning inside her. She thought of her father's face, gone brick red with fury, of Rowena's cold eyes and Vespera's honeyed smile, of the life that waited for her, if she said no, a lifetime of disgrace or a loveless match to whoever would take a stained bride. Or one chance, one single impossible chance to change everything. She lifted her eyes to his. All right, she said. I accept. Something moved through Cassian's face. Relief, surprise, both. You're certain? No, Ilara admitted, and a small broken laugh escaped her. But I have nothing left to lose. He held out his hand again, and this time she took it without hesitation. There's something you should know, he said, his voice low. The moment we walk out that door, the whole world will believe this child is mine, that you are to be my queen. You'll have to live it, every day. Can you do that? I don't know how to be a queen. You don't have to. The ghost of something crossed his mouth, not quite a smile. Just stay at my side. Let me handle the rest. He guided her to the door, but before he opened it, he stopped, looked back at her one last time. Lady Ilara. Yes. Thank you for trusting me. She didn't know what to say, so she only nodded. And Cassian opened the door, and the two of them walked back into the light. The ballroom erupted the instant they reappeared. Cassian kept Ilara's hand locked in his and walked her straight to the center of the hall, to the very place where the elders and the greatest nobles stood gathered, where her father stood pale as death, where Rowena and Vespera watched with faces frozen in disbelief. He stopped before them all, and when he spoke, his voice filled the vast room and silenced every soul in it. I have an announcement. Every head turned, every breath held. Cassian drew Ilara closer, rested one hand protective at the small of her back. Lady Ilara carries my child. Clear, steady, unshakable. And she will be my queen. The silence that followed was total. And then chaos. What impossible? The Alpha King has an heir. When did this? But how? The elders exchanged stunned looks. One stepped forward, the old one with the long white beard, his hands trembling. Your Majesty, this is most unexpected. It is the truth, Cassian said. The child she carries is mine, and I intend to marry her. Vespera lurched forward, her composure cracking clean in half. That can't be right. Elara, never, she never said, because it was private. Cassian cut across her cold as winter iron. And now it isn't. Rowena's eyes moved between Elara and the king, her whole careful face, a study in shock and something uglier beneath it. And Lord Bramwell. Bramwell simply stared at his daughter, his ruined daughter, as though the ground had opened beneath his feet and shown him the sky. An elder cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if this is true, then the succession is secured. The kingdom has its heir. It does, but we'll need a proper ceremony when... In due time, Cassian said. Lady Elara is in the final month of her pregnancy. I will not subject her to the strain of a royal wedding now. We wait until after the child is born. The elder looked as if he might argue. Another laid a hand on his arm. That is acceptable. What matters is that the heir is coming. Cassian nodded, satisfied. And then he turned to Elara. His blue eyes found hers, and for a moment the whole shrieking room fell away. Are you all right? He asked. Soft, for her alone. She didn't know if she was. She didn't know if she could hold a single one of the things that had happened in the last quarter hour. But she looked up at him, and she nodded. I am. The faintest smile touched his mouth. Small, almost nothing. But there. Then let's give them a reason to believe. And in front of the entire court, 100 nobles, 12 elders, her father and her stepmother, and the sister who had poured poison into her cup, and smiled. The Alpha. King bent his head and pressed a gentle kiss to Elara's forehead. The gesture was simple, and it was enormous. Elara closed her eyes, felt the warmth of it move through her like the first sunlight after a long winter. And for one breath, just one, she let herself pretend it was real. When she opened her eyes, the whole room was watching her. Some faces shocked, some jealous, some plainly refusing to believe. But it didn't matter, because for the first time in 8 months, Elara stood in a room full of people and did not feel like nothing. She did not sleep that night. They'd given her a suite in the castle. Hers now the maids had said curtsying to her, a thing no one had ever done, and she lay in the enormous bed, staring up at a ceiling carved with vines and moons, and none of it felt real. I'm going to be a queen. The thought would not settle. It circled and refused to land. The child shifted inside her. Real or not, this was real. She laid a hand over the small, insistent turning of it. What have I gotten us into? She whispered. But she knew. She'd done what she had to do. She had reached out and seized the only rope thrown to her in 8 months of drowning, and she would not apologize for it. Still, something gnawed at the edges of her. He's looking for another woman. He'd been so clear. Someone he'd met. Someone who'd marked him in a way Elara couldn't fathom. And when he found her, this arrangement would end, and Elara would take her child and her fortune and walk away into the rest of her life. She should have felt only gratitude. So why did that thought sit in her chest like a swallowed stone? Foolish, she told herself. It's an arrangement, a bargain, nothing more. Don't you dare into something it isn't. Haven't you learned? Haven't you learned what happens when you let yourself want things? She closed her eyes. Down the long, dark corridors of the castle, in a room where a single candle guttered low, two women were not sleeping either. He's engaged to her. Vespera paced red silk hissing across the stone. To Alara, that mewling little disgrace. She sat in a corner like a whipped dog, and he chose her. Rowena did not pace. Rowena sat very still, and still was worse. Sit down, she said. You'll wear a groove in the floor. How did she? I don't know. And that more than anything was what put the edge in Rowena's voice. Because Rowena had spent 20 years understanding exactly how every room worked, exactly who held every card, and tonight a room had done something she could not explain. But I will find out. There is something wrong here, Vespera. A man like that does not lose his heart to a ruined nobody in the space of a single evening. He barely looked at her, and then he claimed her child. Vespera stopped. You think it's a lie? I think, Rowena said slowly, that it is far too convenient, and that anything built on a lie can be pulled down. We only have to find the thread. She rose, smoothing emerald silk with hands that did not shake. You wanted to be queen, my dear. That door has not closed. It has merely become more interesting to open. And Alara, Rowena moved to the window, looked out over the moonlit garden, silver and still, where far below a fountain, whispered to no one. And something crossed her face then, something the candlelight caught for just a moment. That was not simple greed, something older, a memory, a wound so long carried it had worn a groove in her, the way water wears stone. Bramwell, the name she never said aloud. The proud house that had once looked at a young woman and found her wanting, that had laughed her out of a ballroom of its own a lifetime ago, before she'd learned to smile and count and wait. She had married into that house at last, married its master, sat at its table. But you don't forgive the room that taught you what you were worth. You just wait for its daughters. Alara, Rowena said softly to the glass to the moon, will not be a problem for much longer. And behind her, Vespera smiled. But neither of them saw the door across the corridor cracked the barest inch, nor the young maid, behind it the girl with the kind eyes who had come to bring fresh candles and stayed frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth, who now backed silently away, and ran to find the one man in this castle she knew would listen. The morning after came wrapped in silk and silence, and Alara did not know which frightened her more. A maid woke her with soft knocks and a tray of breakfast fruit and warm bread and tea in a cup so fine you could see the light through it, and then she curtsied. Deep. The kind of curtsy Alara had spent her whole life watching other women receive. Good morning, my lady. His Majesty asked that we see to your every comfort. His Majesty. Alara sat up in that enormous bed and did not know what to do with her own hands. Because yesterday, she had been a stain, a shame to be hidden behind loose dresses and quiet corners. And this morning, a girl was bowing to her and calling her my lady, as if the whole world hadn't spent 8 months teaching Alara she was worth nothing at all. Thank you, she managed. The maid hesitated at the door. Is there anything else, bath-fresh gowns? His Majesty was most particular. Every detail, he said. Every detail. Alara looked at the girl. Really looked. And there was something in the maid's face, a nervousness, a flicker of something held back, that she couldn't quite read. No, Alara said softly. I think I have everything I need. Which was a lie. because she had a suite of rooms and a staff of servants, and access to anything a person could want. And she had never in her life felt so completely, hollowly alone. She ate by herself, dressed by herself, and when she finally gathered the courage to leave her rooms, she discovered she had nowhere to go. The castle was a labyrinth of marble and shadow, and she knew not a single soul in it. So she wandered, and she was passing a half-open door when she heard his voice. "Keep searching!" Cassian, low, urgent. She stopped without meaning to, one hand against the cold stone. Someone knows something. A servant. A guard. Anyone who was in the royal wing that night. Ask again. Offer coin. Offer anything. And Torin's voice, tired. "We've questioned everyone, Cassian. No one saw her. Or no one will say." "Then question them twice." Elara pulled her hand back from the wall as if it had burned her. "He's still looking. Even now. Even with me here. Even after last night, after the forehead and the whole court watching, he's still tearing the kingdom apart for her. Of course he is. That's the arrangement. That's the whole point of you, Elara. You're the placeholder." The pause. The convenient lie he tells while he waits for the real thing. She walked away before she could hear another word, and told herself the ache in her chest was only hunger. He found her in the gardens that afternoon. She was sitting on a stone bench beneath an ancient oak, watching the birds work the hedges, and the late sun laid gold over everything. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elara felt something close to peace. Lady Elara. She turned. Cassian stood a few steps off, dressed plainly, now no formal tunic, just a dark shirt open at the collar sleeves, pushed to the elbow. And somehow the plainness made him larger, as if the crown had only ever been getting in the way. "Your Majesty." She started to rise. "No, please. Stay." He came closer. "May I?" She nodded, too surprised to do otherwise. He sat. A careful, respectful distance between them. And for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, and the birds went on with their small, important business, and the fountain whispered somewhere behind them. "How are you feeling?" he asked at last. Elara considered lying. The polite lie. "Fine, Your Majesty. Grateful, Your Majesty." She told the truth instead. Lost. Cassian nodded slowly, as though it were the most reasonable answer in the world. "Yesterday I was the woman no one would stand beside," she went on, surprising herself. "Today there are girls curtsying to me and calling me a queen. I don't know how to hold that. I don't know where to put it." "You don't have to hold all of it at once." His voice was gentle. "One day at a time. That's all anyone can do." She glanced at him sideways, studied the hard line of his profile against the gold light, and she found herself curious about him in a way that alarmed her. Because he was the Alpha King feared unbending a man who ruled provinces and had walked through wars. And yet, here he sat on a garden bench, beside a disgraced girl, speaking to her as if she were a person. The contradiction of him would not leave her alone. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why did you truly do it? And please," she held his gaze, "don't tell me it was only to buy time with the elders. There were other ways. Cleaner ways. Ways that didn't require you to shackle yourself to a stranger." Cassian was quiet a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped low. "When I heard those women talking about you," he said, looking out over the hedges, "the cruelty of it, the way they'd decided everything about you, without knowing a single true thing, something in me refused it." He turned to her. "No one should be treated the way they were treating you. Least of all a woman carrying a child. Something moved through Ilara's chest, warm and dangerous. He felt it, the injustice of it. He looked at me and saw a person and not a scandal. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For that. For the way out." Cassian shook his head, and the ghost of something crossed his mouth. "You gave me one too, so I suppose that makes us even." A comfortable silence settled between them. Ilara looked out at the flowers nodding in the breeze, and for a moment she let herself simply be here in the sun, unafraid. And then, because she couldn't help herself, because the stone in her chest wanted a name, "This woman you're looking for," she said, not daring to look at him. "You must feel a great deal for her." He didn't answer right away. When she finally dared to glance over, he was staring off into the middle distance, lost somewhere she couldn't follow. "I don't know what I feel," he admitted. "I only know that I need to find her." There it was again, that cold thread pulling tight. Jealousy number, no it can't be. You barely know this man. You have no right to a single splinter of that feeling. Put it down. "And if you never find her?" she asked. Barely a whisper. Cassian turned, and those winter blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her look away. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life searching." Ilara stood, too fast. "I should go. It's getting late." He rose with her. "Ilara." She stopped. "I want you to know," he said. "Whatever this arrangement is, whatever happens with any of it, I will protect you. You and your child both. No one in this world will hurt you. You have my word." And she had to leave then, quickly, before the tears she'd sworn off could betray her, because no one had ever offered to protect her before, and she did not know what to do with a kindness she was so certain she would one day have to give back. The days folded into one another. Ilara learned the shape of the castle, learned which corridors caught the morning light, and which stayed cold all day, learned the names of the maids, and which of them smiled at her, and which only pretended to. But mostly, she learned solitude. Cassian was consumed by the kingdom councils, disputes, the endless business of ruling, and when he wasn't, he was with Torin, and the two of them were bent over maps and reports, chasing a ghost through every province in the realm. Ilara caught glimpses of him at meals in corridors, always at a distance. They rarely spoke, and it was carving something hollow into her, which was absurd, which she knew was absurd, because you cannot miss what was never yours, and she scolded herself for it daily, and it changed nothing at all. Until the night he appeared at her door. She'd been eating alone in her rooms, as she always did when the knock came. She opened it, expecting a maid. The Alpha King stood there instead. "Your Majesty." She stepped back, startled. "Has something happened?" "No, He stopped, and for a moment the most powerful man in the kingdom looked entirely at a loss. "Do you always eat alone?" She blinked. "Yes, I assumed you'd prefer it." His brow drew down. "Why would I prefer that?" Because this isn't real. Because I'm a bargain, not a bride. Because you don't owe me your company. Because it's only an arrangement." Cassian was quiet a moment, then let out a slow breath. "It may be an arrangement," he said, "but that doesn't mean you have to be alone in it." He took a step back. "Tomorrow, dine with me, in the main hall." Her heart did something foolish. "Are you certain?" "I am." He turned to go, then stopped, looked back over his shoulder, and there was almost a smile in it. "And Ilara, stop calling me your Majesty when it's only us. My name is Cassian." And then he was gone, and Ilara stood in her doorway, with her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to get out. Dinner was a battlefield disguised as a meal. She sat at the great table with Cassian at its head, Tauren at his right, a scattering of court nobles filling the rest. And every one of them watched her, weighed her, judged her over the rims of their wine cups, and Ilara felt each look land like a small, cold stone. Cassian noticed. He set down his knife, and when he spoke, the whole table went still. "Is there a problem?" Silence. Absolute. "Because if anyone here has something to say about my future queen," he went on, his voice pleasant and utterly lethal, "I'd suggest they say it now. To me. Directly." No one moved. No one breathed. Then Cassian picked his knife back up, and slowly, cautiously, the conversations resumed, and Ilara sat there with warmth flooding through her chest, undone by a thing so simple she could hardly bear it. He defended me, in front of all of them, without my asking. He put himself between me and the whole cruel room, and through the rest of that meal, he did something she'd never known a powerful man to do. He drew her in, asked her opinion on matters of the kingdom, turned to her when others spoke as if her thoughts had weight. And in doing so, he taught the entire table how to treat her by treating her himself like she mattered. By the time the plates were cleared, Ilara understood something that terrified her more than any of Rowena's smiles. She was beginning to care for him. Not the arrangement, not the safety. Him. And that she knew with the grim certainty of a woman who had already learned what wanting cost. That was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her yet. They came the next morning. Rowena and Vespera, sweet as arsenic. "Dearest Ilara." Rowena swept into the suite as though she'd been invited, emeralds at her throat, that too-wide smile fixed in place. "We simply had to come and see you. Family, after all. We couldn't stay away." Vespera drifted in behind her, red-lipped, and let her eyes crawl over the room, the velvet drapes, the carved bed frame, the fine things Ilara had done nothing to earn, and everything to survive. "Such wonderful accommodations," Vespera murmured, trailing a finger along the curtains. "You must feel as though you're living someone else's dream." "It's different," Ilara said, and kept her spine straight, and did not let them see her flinch. Rowena settled into a chair, smoothing her skirts with terrible patience. "We're so happy for you, dear. Who could have imagined it would all work out so beautifully?" A tilt of the head, eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Though I'll admit it was rather sudden. The king never breathed a word about the two of you. Not to anyone. Strange, don't you think? To keep such a thing so very quiet. Careful. They're fishing. They smell the lie. Don't give them the thread. Ilara, don't you dare." "It was private," Ilara said evenly. "It wasn't meant to be public. Not yet." Of course. But there was a blade in the softness. "Only it must have been so difficult, keeping a secret that large, especially when you were so lost. When you didn't even know who the father—" "Things are rarely what they seem," Ilara said, and she watched something flicker in Rowena's eyes at that. A small, sharp interest, as if Ilara had just handed her a corner of exactly the thread she'd come hunting. Vespera wandered the room, examining everything with exaggerated care. "And the wedding. Have you set a date? Too light. Far too light. Not yet. We're waiting until after the child is born." "How convenient," Vespera breathed, almost to herself. Rowena rose, smoothed her skirts one final time. "Well, we won't keep you, dear. We only wanted to show our support. And to say—" She paused at the door, turned back with that dreadful sweetness. "If you ever need advice on how to manage all of this delicate new situation of yours, we're here. We know how complicated court life can be." "Thank you," Ilara said, and meant not one syllable of it. And when the door finally closed behind them, she sank onto the edge of the bed. She felt she'd been holding for an hour. Because that had not been a visit. That had been a hunt. She learned how right she was that same night. She was preparing for bed when she heard voices in the corridor, hushed, urgent, and she knew them at once. Rowena, Vespera, still in the castle when they should long since have gone home. Ilara cracked her door, just an inch, and saw the two of them at the head of the great staircase, heads bent together, Vespera glancing about like a thief. "Did you see how she hesitated when I asked about the wedding?" Vespera whispered. "She's hiding something. I know it. Of course she is." Rowena's voice low and certain. "It's a farce. All of it. He's using her to buy himself time. He doesn't know the girl. He doesn't want the girl. Any fool with eyes can see it. And when he tires of her, she goes back to being nothing," Vespera finished, venom curling through the words. "Which gives us an opening." "Exactly. Stay close to him. Be in the rooms he's in. Show him what he ought to have chosen." Rowena's hand closed over her daughter's arm. "The moment he realizes he could have something better, he'll be rid of her." And Ilara eased the door shut, silent, her heart a fist against her ribs. They're right. That's the worst of it. That's the part that turns me to ash. They're right. It is temporary. He is looking for someone else. And when he finds her, I go back to being no one, and they'll be waiting. She lay down, laid a hand over her belly, where the child turned in its endless, patient dark. "Don't you worry," she whispered. "Whatever happens, whatever they do, I will protect you. I swear it on my own life." But even as she said it, even as she meant it, with everything she had at question, circled and would not let her sleep. And who, it asked, will protect me? The dinner was Rowena's idea. Ilara was certain of it. An intimate gathering, the king. A handful of court, and somehow, Rowena and Vespera seated close to the throne, while Ilara found herself banished to the far end of the table, surrounded by strangers watching from a distance as Vespera made her move. And oh, she made it well. Every laugh a little too bright. Every touch to a nobleman's arm engineered to draw the king's eye. Vespera in crimson, glowing, circling ever nearer to Cassian, and Ilara sat at the cold end of the table with her hands folded over her belly, and watched and hated herself for watching. He's only being polite. He's not looking at her. Stop it. Stop counting the times she touches him. It doesn't matter. He isn't yours. He was never yours. You have no claim to this jealousy. Put it down. Put it down. But it hurt, God help her. It hurt to watch. At the head of the table, Cassian was drowning. He'd clocked Vespera the instant she entered, impossible not to given how carefully she stayed in his eye line. Every loud laugh, every accidental brush of fingers, every glance held a half-second too long. It was exhausting in a way that battles had never been. "Your Majesty," Vespera again leaning in, "your glass is empty. Allow me." And before he could refuse, she'd taken up the wine and filled it. "Thank you," he said, automatic, his eyes already drifting down the length of the table, to her. "Ilara." seated far away among people she didn't know, quiet, withdrawn, her hands resting on her belly, as she listened politely to conversations she had no part in. And Cassian felt the strangest pull to simply rise, cross the room, and sit beside her. Which is absurd. She's an arrangement, a bargain struck in a study. So why does the far end of this table feel like the only interesting place in the room? What is it about her? What is this? This feeling, I can't name this thing that turns in my chest every time I look at that dark hair, that bowed head. Like I've stood in this exact moment before. The musicians began to play. And Vespera made her final move. She rose, circled the table, stopped beside Cassian close enough that he smelled the heavy perfume before he saw her. "Your Majesty," she murmured. Low, meant only for him. "Perhaps we might speak somewhere more private. There's something I'd so love to discuss with you." Cassian looked at her, and read every intention in her face as plainly as a page. "No," he said, firm, polite, final. "I don't believe that would be appropriate." Vespera blinked, genuinely thrown. I only... The Lady Vespera." He rose to his full height, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. "I appreciate the interest, but understand something. I am committed to Lady Alara, and nothing is going to change that." Her face went scarlet. A few nearby nobles had heard, and turned, and Vespera stood exposed in the center of her own humiliation. "I wasn't suggesting," she stammered. "I'm sure you weren't," Cassian said coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to be alone." And he left the hall. But the Alpha King was not alone for long. Because something was wrong. Very wrong. He'd made it halfway to his study when the floor tilted beneath him. The walls seemed to breathe. His own hand braced against the cold stone swam in his vision, and a sick warmth spread up through his chest. He knew this feeling. The wine. I barely touched it. One sip before something felt off, and I set it down. But it was enough. It was moon herb. It had to be. That cursed lunar herb, the thief of reason, the same poison that flowed through the sacred wine at every council gathering. Someone had put it in his cup, and he did not have to think very hard about whose hand had held the pitcher. Cassian pushed off the wall and staggered down the corridor. A guard moved toward him, alarmed. He waved the man off. He needed to get somewhere safe. He needed someone he trusted. He needed Alara, which made no sense at all. He should have called for Torin, for a guard, for the physician. But his fogged and reeling mind could produce only one name, one face, one direction, and his feet were already carrying him there, before his reason could object. He didn't understand it, but something in him, something deeper than thought, deeper than reason, something that had been trying to speak for 8 long months, knew exactly which door to find. He reached it, braced himself against the frame to keep from falling, and knocked. Once, twice. The door opened, and Alara's eyes went wide. "Cassian!" Alarm cut clean through her. "What's happened?" He tried to answer. The words came out tangled, useless. "Alara, help me. I can't stand right." She didn't hesitate. She ducked under his arm and took his weight across her shoulders, small and 8 months round and strong, stronger than either of them expected, and pulled him inside. "What did you drink?" She guided him toward the bed. "Cassian, what did you drink?" "Wine," he managed. "There was something in it. Herbs." Alara went still. Moon herb. The word landed in her like a stone down a well. And with it came a memory she'd spent 8 months burying a haul. A poisoned cup, a hand that kept refilling her glass, a night that had ended in a room lit by moonlight and had cost her everything. "Moon herb," she whispered. Cassian nodded, sinking onto the edge of the bed, the room turning around him. "Vespera," he breathed. "I think she put something in my glass." And a white-hot fury bloomed in Ilara's chest, because she knew that poison. She knew it in her bones, in her blood, in the shape of the life growing inside her. She knew exactly what that herb could steal from a person, and exactly who in this world was so willing to steal it. But she pushed the fury down, because this was not the moment. "Lie down," she said, easing him back against the pillows. "You have to let it pass. There's nothing else to be done. You just have to wait it out." He obeyed. But when she moved to step away to fetch water to give him room, his hand caught her wrist. "Don't go," he said. And it came out more vulnerable than he'd meant it to, stripped of every ounce of his crown. "Please." Ilara looked down at his hand around her wrist. At his face unfocused, undone, the most powerful man in the kingdom laid low and asking her to stay. Something in her chest cracked clean open. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, and Cassian did not let go of her hand. "Ilara," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed. Shh." She squeezed his fingers. "Rest. I'm here." He fell asleep, still holding on to her, and Ilara stayed, watching over him through the long, dark hours. The Alpha King, always so unbending, so armored, so far above the reach of anyone, now breathing slow and defenseless in her bed. And she thought about how strange it was, how utterly upside down, that the two of them had been brought together by the very same poison. Twice, though, only one of them knew it. She didn't know how long she sat there. Hours. And somewhere in them exhaustion took her, and she lay down beside him. Just for a moment. Just to close her eyes, and sleep pulled her under before she could stop it. She woke to sunlight and the slow, terrible awareness of where she was, spooned against him. His arm around her waist, his hand resting gentle, unconscious protective over the curve of her belly. His body warm and solid against her back, his breath stirring the hair at her neck. Ilara went rigid. Gods, what do I do? Move. Move away. This can't if he wakes and finds us like this, if he thinks But he's so warm. And his hand is on the baby. And I have not been held. Not once. Not in 8 months. Not by anyone. And I did not know how much She couldn't make herself move. She felt him stir behind her. His breathing shift. He was waking. And for one long suspended moment, neither of them moved at all. Both perfectly still. Both wide awake now and painfully completely aware of exactly where they lay. Then Cassian pulled away. Fast. Ilara turned to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, dragging both hands down his face. He started. "Ilara, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "You were under the herb," she said, sitting up. "It wasn't your fault. None of it." He turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't name. Confusion. Conflict. And underneath both something else, something that frightened her, because she thought she might feel it too. "I need to go," he said suddenly, and stood. "Cassian, I'm sorry." Again. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him. And Ilara sat alone in the tangled sheets, the warmth of him still fading from the linen, and pressed a hand to the place on her belly where his had rested. What just happened? He avoided her for days after that. Not on purpose, he told himself. He was busy. Council's borders the endless machine of rule. But the truth was he didn't know how to look at her. Not after waking with her in his arms, and feeling with a certainty that terrified him that it was exactly where he was meant to be, which was wrong, which broke every rule of the thing they'd agreed to. He had a plan. He was searching for someone else. He had no business feeling this pull toward a woman he'd claimed as a matter of politics. And yet, "You're avoiding her," Torin said, letting himself into the study without knocking. "I'm not avoiding anyone." Liar. Torin dropped into the chair across the desk. "You leave the hall when she enters it. You barely meet her eyes. What happened?" Cassian said nothing. Torin sighed. "Look, I don't know what's tangled up in that head of yours, but whatever it is, you're hurting her. She doesn't understand why you've gone cold, and she deserves better than to be left guessing." "Since when?" Cassian said, an edge creeping in. "Do you care so deeply about Lady Elara?" Torin frowned. "Always." And something in Cassian went taut. "Always," Torin went on, oblivious. "Elara and we knew each other as children. Grew up in the same village near enough. I looked after her like a little sister. Hadn't laid eyes on her in years, didn't even know her at the ball. What with everything? The belly, the fine clothes, time." He smiled faintly. "And she didn't know me either at first. The beard, the scars. But the moment we finally recognized each other," he spread his hands, "it was like coming home." Cassian was very still. Little sister. Childhood. Coming home. And still some ugly small thing under his ribs would not settle, and he despised it, and he could not make it stop. "You never mentioned this," he said. "Didn't seem to matter." Torin leaned forward. "It does now, though, because you're acting like a jealous fool, and I've known you too long to pretend I don't see it." Cassian opened his mouth to deny it. Torin cut him off. "Don't. I know you. And whatever you're feeling for her, it's real. So stop fighting it, before you break something that can't be mended." And he left. Cassian meant to clear his head in the gardens. Instead, he found them. Elara and Torin on a bench beneath the old oak talking, and then Elara laughed. A real laugh. Free and bright and unguarded, the kind Cassian had never once managed to draw from her. And Torin reached out and touched her arm, easy familiar, and Cassian saw red. He knew. He knew it was nothing. Torin had told him not an hour ago. Brother and sister. Childhood and coming home. But knowing it and watching it were two different countries, and the sight of Elara, happy glowing with someone who wasn't him, lit something in his chest he had no name for and no control over. He was across the garden before he'd decided to move. Lady Elara. Colder than he meant. A word. In private. She looked up, startled. "I, of course." Torin rose, shot Cassian a warning look, and left them. And Cassian stood there, realizing too late that he had no idea what he wanted to say. He'd crossed the whole garden on nothing but the fire in his blood. "You and Torin seem close," he said, and hated how it sounded. Elara's brow drew down. "We are. He's my oldest friend. He told me." "Then what," she said, slowly, "is the problem?" And Cassian didn't have an answer that wasn't unforgivable. "I'm jealous. I have no right to be. It makes no sense. Put it down. Just be careful," he said instead. Elara stood, and her eyes flashed. "Careful. With Torin. The one person in this castle who has shown me a scrap of genuine warmth." "I've shown you," You've shown me distance." Her voice rose, months of swallowed hurt spilling loose. "You barely look at me. You leave rooms when I enter them. And now you come here to warn me about my oldest friend, while you chase some faceless woman across the entire kingdom. And I am here, carrying a child, trapped in an arrangement that—" She stopped, the words dying in her throat. "That what?" Cassian pressed. "Closer now." "That is killing me," Ilara whispered. The silence that fell was total. They were close. So dangerously close. And Cassian's eyes dropped to her mouth, and Ilara saw it, and when their gazes met again, something between them simply broke. He pulled her to him, and she did not resist. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate and devastating, these past weeks of swallowed feeling erupting all at once, and Ilara's fingers found his hair, and Cassian held her like she might dissolve if he loosened his grip, and the whole spinning world narrowed to just this, just them, just the fire they'd both been pretending wasn't there. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. Cassian rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "This kiss," he breathed, his voice wrecked. "I know this. Why do I know this?" And Ilara felt tears sting her eyes, because she understood what that meant. He was comparing. He'd felt something in her kiss that reminded him of the ghost he couldn't stop chasing, and the cruelty of it, of being a stand-in even in the one moment she'd let herself feel real, was more than she could bear. What if I'm not enough? What if I'm only ever the shadow of the one he actually wants? She stepped back, wrapped her arms around herself. "Cassian, No," he said, opening his eyes. Don't say anything. He dragged a hand through his hair. "I need to think." And for the second time, he left her standing alone in that garden. And Ilara stood beneath the old oak, one hand pressed to her lips, and understood that whatever had just happened had changed everything, and she did not know whether it had saved her or destroyed her. Torin found the thread 3 days later. He hadn't meant to. He'd been following the king's endless orders, questioned the servants of the royal wing again, twice off her coin, and mostly he'd gotten what he always got. Fear, shrugs, the particular blankness of people who'd learned that knowing things was dangerous. Until the maid with the kind eyes stopped him in a low corridor and would not meet his gaze. "Commander," barely a whisper. "You've been asking about the night of the last council gathering, about a woman. In the royal wing." Torin went still. "I have. I've been afraid to say." Her hands twisted in her apron. Because of who, she serves near. But I heard Lady Rowena and Lady Vespera talking that night. And I've heard them talking since. And I can't carry it anymore, Commander. It isn't right what they mean to do. "Tell me," Torin said, gently. "Whatever it is, tell me." And she did. She told him about a girl half carried up the deserted stairs of the royal wing by a tall, dark man, both of them barely upright. She told him she'd found him in that room after cleaning it the next day before the household woke. A brooch, small, silver, wrought in the shape of a crescent moon tangled in the bedclothes, dropped and forgotten. And Torin's blood went cold. Because he knew that brooch. He'd seen it 100 times as a boy, pinned to the collar of a solemn little girl in a village a lifetime ago. A crescent moon worn smooth with handling. Her mother's before she died. The only thing of value Ilara had ever owned. The only thing she never took off. He knew whose room the tall, dark man had carried her to that night. He knew whose bed it had been. And now, kneeling in a corridor, a silver crescent, cold in his palm, a terrified maid, weeping quietly before him. Torin understood all at once the thing his king had been tearing the kingdom apart to learn. The woman Cassian had been searching for. The ghost. The one whose kiss he knew. She had been sleeping down the hall this whole time. She was carrying the answer inside her own body. It's Ilara. Gods above. It was always Ilara. Torin surged to his feet, the brooch clenched in his fist, already moving, already running for the king. And that was the exact moment in a room 3 floors above that Rowena set down her teacup and said very quietly to the men she had paid to ask no questions. Take her tonight, before she has the child, and do not let anyone see. They came for her at the edge of a dark. Ilara had gone to the gardens for air, because the child sat low, now heavy and restless, and the walls of even the finest suite had begun to close in, and she was standing beneath the old oak when she felt it. That prickle at the back of the neck, that animal knowing. She was not alone. 2 men, not castle guards, men she had never seen moving through the hedges with the quiet of people who did this for coin. Lady Ilara, one of them soft, almost kind. We only want to talk. And Ilara ran. Or tried to. Because a woman in her 9th month does not run. She lurches one hand under the great weight of her belly. Breath already tearing, and they were on her before she reached the light of the doors. A hand clamped over her mouth, an arm around her hard as iron. Shh, right against her ear. It won't hurt. Just come quiet. She fought. God, she fought, clawed, twisted, threw every scrap of her weight against them. But that they were strong, and she was heavy and slow, and they dragged her back into the dark toward the stables. And that was when she saw him. Torin. Crossing the yard, a silver something clenched in his fist, his face lit with an urgency she'd never seen on it. Torin! She screamed, before the hand crushed the sound back into her throat. He turned, and his eyes went wide as everything he'd been running to say crashed headlong into what he was seeing. He drew his sword. Let her go. The men froze. Then one of them wrenched a knife free and laid it against the pale skin of Ilara's throat. One more step, Commander, and she bleeds. Torin stopped, but he did not lower the blade. You don't want to do this. Do you know who she is? We know exactly who she is. The man was already backing toward a waiting horse. And we were paid very well to make her gone. They threw her over the saddle like a sack of grain. Ilara screamed again, one last wild cry into the night, and it was useless. Hooves struck stone, and they were gone, swallowed by the dark, galloping north into the trees, while Torin ran after them on foot, screaming, and could not catch them. So he did the only thing left. He turned, and ran for the castle, and bellowed the one name that could tear this whole kingdom apart to get her back. Cassian was in the great hall when the shouting reached him. He came out at a dead run, and found Torin doubled over, chest heaving, blood on his shirt, from some collision in the dark. What happened? Ilara. Torin could barely get it out. They took her, Cassian. 2 men, not ours. Paid, they said. Paid to make her gone. And Cassian's world stopped turning. Who? I don't know who hired them, but Cassian. Torin gripped his arm, forced him to focus. She's near her time. She could go into labor any hour. Out there. Alone. If we don't. Cassian did not wait to hear the rest. He became a storm, He barked orders that emptied the barracks. He had every horse saddled. He had the North Road sealed and the woods flooded with men, and through all of it, there was only one thought hammering in his skull, drowning out councils and crowns, and 8 months of ghost chasing one single unbearable thought. Not her. Not her. I cannot lose her. Find her! He roared into the courtyard, and grown men flinched. Turn over every stone in this kingdom. Burn the woods down if you have to. Find her. Torin caught his shoulder as he swung up onto his horse. We'll find her. I swear it to you. And Cassian looked down at his oldest friend, and Torin saw a thing in the king's face he had never once seen there. Not in 2 wars, not in the plague years, not in the worst nights of both their lives. Pure, undisguised terror. I can't lose her, Torin, Cassian said, barely a whisper. Do you understand me? I can't. And in that moment, sitting his horse in the torchlit dark, sick with a fear he'd never felt for anyone, Cassian finally understood the thing his own heart had been trying to tell him for weeks. It didn't matter who the woman from that night had been. None of it mattered anymore. The ghost, the search, the 8 months of hollow rooms, all of it went silent all at once before this one blazing truth. He was in love with Ilara. Completely. Irreversibly. In love with Ilara. Ride, he said. And they rode. Cassian rode as he had never ridden in his life. The trees smeared past. The wind cut his face. But none of it reached him, because there was room in him for only one thing, and her name was the rhythm of the hooves. Ilara, Ilara, Ilara. Torin rode at his flank just as desperate. They followed the churned earth of the North Road, stopping at every hovel and holdfast to ask the same frantic question, until at last, a peasant with a lantern pointed a shaking hand toward the black wall of the forest. 2 men. A woman thrown over the saddle. She looked heavy with child. They rode for the old hunting cabin, north, past the dead pines. Cassian was moving before the man finished, and then, mid-gallop, Torin hauled hard on his reins. Cassian, wait! Cassian wheeled his horse half-mad with the delay. We don't have time. But Torin's face had gone gray, like a man staring at a ghost. And in his fist, held up in the torchlight, something small and silver caught the light. A brooch, a crescent moon. I know who she is, Torin said, and Cassian went utterly perfectly still. His heart slammed once against his ribs so hard it hurt. Who? He said. But his voice came out strange, because somewhere underneath the terror, somewhere he'd refused to look, he already knew. He'd known since a garden and a kiss he couldn't explain. The woman from that night. Torin swallowed. The one you've torn the kingdom apart to find Cassian, it's Ilara. It was always Ilara. And Cassian closed his eyes, and it was not surprise that moved through him. Not really. Not after the kiss that had felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. Not after the way his own poisoned body had staggered past every guard in the castle to find exactly her door. Not after 100 small, impossible things that had never quite added up. I know, he said quietly, opening his eyes. Torin blinked, thunderstruck. You know since when? I suspected. In the garden, when I kissed her. Cassian's jaw worked. It was the same, the exact same. The way she made me feel I'd felt it once before in a room I could barely remember. But I wouldn't let myself believe it. Because it didn't make sense. How could she be the woman from that night if no one saw her? If no one knew? Because that night everyone drank too much. Torin said the words tumbling out. The whole royal wing was empty, every guard, every servant pulled down to serve the feast. The corridors were deserted. No one saw, because there was no one there to see. Cassian's chest heaved. And Ilara barely remembers any of it, Torin went on. She told me once. It was all fog to her, because Vespera poisoned her cup, the same moon herb, the same as they used on you at the dinner. She was drugged out of her own mind. And so were you. Both of you. That's why neither of you knew the other after. That's why you looked at her at that ball, and felt something you couldn't name. You weren't strangers, Cassian. You never were. Something burst open in Cassian's chest. Relief and horror, and a joy so violent it hurt. All this time, he breathed, I searched the whole world for a woman who was sleeping down the hall, who I was falling in love with all over again, and never knew she was the same soul. Yes, Torin said softly, and then the horror caught up to the joy. Because if it was true, if the child Ilara carried was his truly, his flesh of his flesh, then she was out there, in the freezing dark, in labor, kidnapped and alone carrying his son. And he had spent 8 months letting the world call her ruined, while the shame was his to share. The baby, Cassian said, his voice breaking on it, is yours, Torin finished. It always was, from the very first night. Cassian felt tears burn his eyes. Then he set his jaw and dug in his heels. Then we ride, he said, and gods help every man who touched her. But this time, it was not only terror that drove him through the dark. It was love. Love for the woman he had searched for across an entire kingdom. A woman who had been beside him the whole time. A woman carrying his true child into a cold and lonely night. Ilara. It had always been Ilara. She lay on the cold plank floor of the cabin, and the pain came in waves that tried to break her in half. Please! She could barely form the word. The 2 men stood by the door, useless, panicking. Please, the baby's coming. I need help. They looked at each other, sweating, out of their depth. We weren't paid for this, one muttered. Then let me go. Can't do that either. And another wave hit her harder, deeper, a great, tearing pressure that dragged a scream out of her and left her clawing at the rough wood of the floor. Not like this, she thought, through the red haze of it. Not here. Not on a cold floor in the dark, with no one who loves me. Please, not like this. And she thought of him. Cassian. Which made no sense, which she had no right to. And yet through all of it, through the fear and the pain, and the terrible loneliness, his was the only face she wanted. His the only hand she wished were holding hers. I love you, she realized. Clear and sudden and devastating, the way you finally see a thing that's been in front of you all along. I fell in love with you, and I didn't even feel it happen. And now I'm going to die on this floor, and you'll never know, and you'll go on searching for a ghost, and you'll never know. It was me. It was always me. Tears slid down into her hair. Another contraction tore through her, and she screamed, and she heard it. Hooves, many of them. Voices raised in the dark. The bright ring of a sword pulled from its sheath. The cabin door did not open. It exploded. Cassian came through it, like the wrath of every god there ever was, and his eyes swept that filthy little room, and found her on the floor, and everything in his face broke at once. Ilara. The 2 men lunged. They never stood a chance. Cassian put them down with a brutal, absolute efficiency, and Torin took the one who tried to bolt for the window, and in the space of 3 heartbeats, it was over. Silence. Just the fire, and Ilara's ragged breathing, and the man she loved crossing the room to fall to his knees at her side. His hands framed her face, shaking. Ilara, Ilara, look at me. I'm here. She opened her eyes, found his, and the tears came harder. Cassian, how did you? Another contraction cut her in two. She screamed, and his eyes flew wide, and he looked back over his shoulder. The baby's coming. Now. Torin was already moving for the door. I'll stand guard outside. You'll need privacy call if you need me. And he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him. And Cassian turned back to her, stripped off his coat, and folded it beneath her head. Pushed the damp hair back from her face with a tenderness that did not match those same hands from a moment ago. It's all right, he said. It's all right. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Do you hear me? I'm not going anywhere. I don't know if I can do this, she sobbed. He took her face in both his hands, made her look at him. You can. You're the strongest woman I have ever known, and I am going to be right here for every single moment of it. She clung to his hand as the next wave crested. You didn't have to come, she gasped through her teeth. It's just an arrangement. You don't owe me. And Cassian gripped her face again, forced her eyes back to his. Stop. His voice broke on the word. Stop that. You think I'd leave you here. You think I'd let you go through this alone. But you're looking for someone else. You said, forget what I said. He cut across her, fierce, certain. Listen to me. Look at me. He waited until her eyes locked onto his. There is no one else. There never was. There's only you, Ilara. It was always you. I was just too much of a fool to see what was in front of me. Tears streamed down her face. You don't have to say that. Just because I love you. Plain, direct, each word laid down like a stone that would not move. I love you in a way that frightens me. When I thought I'd lost you tonight, the whole world stopped. And the thought of living without you, I can't. I won't. Cassian, so yes, I came. His voice cracked wide open. Of course I came. What kind of man leaves the woman he loves, the mother of his child, alone and afraid in the dark? He pressed his forehead to hers. You're mine, Ilara. Truly mine. And I will be right here, every second. She didn't have time to answer, because the next wave came, and it was the one, and there was no more room in the world for anything but this. I have to push, she gasped. Then push, he said. I've got you. I've got you both. The hours after blurred into pain and sweat, and the low, steady anchor of his voice. You're doing so well. Keep going. Keep going, love. I can't anymore. You can. For me. For our son. A little more. And Ilara held his hand like it was the only solid thing left in a world coming apart. And it was. And she bore down with everything. 8 months of surviving had built in her, and with one last scream that shredded her throat raw, she felt the child leave her body. A cry filled the cabin, small and furious and alive. Cassian caught the baby in his own coat, cleared its face with hands gone suddenly gentle, and laid the tiny wailing thing against Ilara's chest. A boy, he said, and his voice came apart on it. Ilara, it's a boy. She looked down at her son, perfect and small and screaming with all the outrage of the newly born, and she had never in her whole hard life seen anything so beautiful. He's perfect, she whispered. And then Cassian went very still. His eyes had caught on something. The baby's right shoulder bared where the coat had slipped. Elara. Strange his voice. Hushed. May I turn him? Just a little. She frowned, but she tilted the child. And there it was. A birthmark. Small, faint against the newborn skin, shaped unmistakably like a crescent moon. Cassian touched it with one trembling finger. Because he knew that mark. Every soul in the kingdom knew that mark. It was the sign carried only by the direct bloodline of the Alpha King, the crescent, borne by every true-born heir of the royal line for 100 generations. The elders had reminded him of it his whole life. The mark will tell. The mark never lies. Gods, he breathed. Tears spilling over, now running unchecked down a face that had faced down armies without flinching. He's mine. He's truly, truly mine. Elara looked from the baby to Cassian, lost. What do you mean? And Cassian sank down beside her. Drew her gently into his arms, the baby cradled between them, and he told her the thing he'd learned on a dark road not an hour before. Elara, I have to tell you something. Something I only understood tonight. He touched her face. Woman I've been searching for 8 months. The one from that night at the council gathering. His voice went rough. It was you. It was always you. She blinked. That night, the poisoned wine. When you stumbled into a stranger in the hall, his thumb traced her cheek. It was me, Elara. I was the man who took you up those stairs. I was the one who tried to pour you water with shaking hands. I was the one you told, his voice broke, you told I was beautiful. And the fog of 8 months began at last to lift. Fragments surfacing, rising. Blue eyes in the dark. A deep voice. You need to drink the water. Strong hands trembling around a cup. My lady, don't say such things to me here. You, she whispered. Wonder and grief and disbelief all at once. It was you. All this time, it was you. Cassian nodded, weeping openly now. I searched the whole kingdom for you. I turned it inside out. And you were sleeping down the hall from me the entire time. You were carrying my son, and neither of us knew. A broken laugh escaped him, half joy, half heartbreak. I fell in love with you twice, Elara. Once that night when I didn't know your name, and again now when I thought you were someone else entirely. Elara shook her head, trying to hold a thing too large to hold. I couldn't remember. I tried. But it was all broken glass and fog. And after I knew I was carrying a child, after everything they did to me, the shame, the whispers, I stopped trying. It hurt too much to reach for a night I wasn't even allowed to grieve. So I let it go. I let you go. Because I didn't know you were something worth holding on to. And Cassian took her face in his hands, with a tenderness that undid her completely. Then let me say it plainly, he said. So there is no more fog between us ever again. I love you, Elara, with every part of who I am. He looked down at this baby, then back up at her. And I love this boy, our son, our true son. The two of you are my family. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making certain you never doubt it. Elara sobbed, clutching the child to her chest. I don't know when it happened, she whispered. But I love you too. I love you too. He pulled her into his arms, her and the baby both, and held them like a man holding the whole of his heart in 2 trembling hands. Then marry me, he said against her hair. For real, Ilara. Not for an arrangement. Not for the elders. Marry me, because you love me. Because you want to build a life with me. All of it. Every ordinary day of it. Yes, she breathed against his chest. Yes, and their son cried between them, and they both laughed through their tears, pulling back to look down at him, this small, furious miracle, who had, without knowing it, brought 2 lost people home. They returned to the castle at dawn, and they returned as something no one had expected. Cassian rode through the gates with Ilara and the baby held close against him, Torin at his side, and the whole household spilled out to meet them. Maids with blankets, servants with water. The physician summoned at a run. See to her, Cassian commanded, sliding down, with Ilara still cradled in his arms. Everything she needs. And then, his voice changed, went to iron, bring me Lady Rowena and Lady Vespera to the great hall, now. While Ilara was carried off to be tended, Cassian went to the hall, the baby still in the crook of his arm, and he waited. They brought the 2 women in, and both of them wore their concern like a costume. Your Majesty, thank the gods. Rowena all wide eyes and wringing hands. We heard about Ilara. We were so terribly worried. Silence. It cracked through the hall like a whip. Every voice died. Cassian stepped down from the dais, slow, deliberate, the newborn king's heir sleeping against his chest. You too, he said very quietly, which was somehow worse than shouting, arranged her kidnapping. You paid men to drag a woman 9 months with child into the freezing woods to die. His eyes moved to Vespera. So that you, the contempt, could have stripped paint, might take her place. Vespera went white. I don't know what you're... Don't! Cassian's voice was arctic. Don't lie to me. Not tonight. Rowena drew herself up, reaching for the old command. Your Majesty, whoever has told you these. The great doors opened, and Torin walked in, dragging one of the kidnappers by the collar, bloodied, cowed, and talking. He's confessed to all of it, Torin said. Who hired him, how much they paid, every last word. And there was nowhere left for them to run. Lord Bramwell, standing among the assembled court, seemed to age a decade in a single breath. He turned to his wife, and his voice came out cracked and small. Rowena, you did this. To my daughter. I was protecting this family. Rowena's mask shattered all at once, and what came out from behind it was raw and old and ugly. That girl does not deserve to be Queen Vespera. Does Vespera has always deserved better than to stand in the shadow of... She caught herself. Too late. But Cassian had seen it. That flash of something older than greed. Some ancient private wound festering for a lifetime behind the emeralds and the smiles. He did not care to understand it. Enough, he said, cold as the grave. Both of you are banished from this kingdom. You have until dawn, tomorrow, to be gone from every province I hold. If you remain past, then you will spend the rest of your lives in a cell. No. Vespera lurched forward. You can't. I can. And I will. Cassian turned the sleeping baby just slightly, so the firelight fell across the small right shoulder. Look, the mark of the Alpha King's true bloodline. This child is my rightful heir, and Ilara is my rightful queen. And if either of you ever so much as speaks her name again, his voice dropped to something lethal, it will be the last word you ever speak. They were dragged out, screaming. and Lord. Bramwell crossed the hall, tears standing in his eyes, and stopped before the king with his head bowed low. Your Majesty, I didn't know. Please, you have to believe I didn't know. Cassian looked at him for a long moment. And here is where a lesser man would have broken him, where the whole cold weight of a king's fury might have come down on the father who'd called his own daughter ruined, who'd never once asked if she'd been wronged, who'd chosen his pride over his child. But Cassian only said gentler now, I believe you, and you are welcome to stay, to know your grandson. His eyes hardened one last time. But those two women will never set foot in my kingdom again. Bramwell nodded, weeping grateful past speech. Elara chose mercy. That was the part no one expected. When she was well enough to speak of it, when the court clamored for Rowena and Vespera to be hunted down, dragged back, made to pay in blood for what they'd done, it was Elara who said no. She sat propped in the great bed, her son at her breast, and she said it quietly, and everyone listened. Let the law have them, not vengeance, not our hands. She looked down at the baby. For 8 months I lived inside other people's hatred. I felt what it does to a person to be handed nothing but contempt, and I will not become the thing that broke me. They have lost everything they schemed for. Let that be their punishment. Let it end here. Because she had learned something in the long dark of those 8 months, that all their cruelty had never managed to teach her the way they'd hoped. That the shame others tried to hang around her neck had never once belonged to her. She had carried it anyway, for a while, because they gave her no choice. But carrying a thing is not the same as owning it, and somewhere between a poisoned cup and a cabin floor, she had finally set it down. She had been called ruined, and she had refused in the end to be ruined. And that refusal had been the truest thing she ever did. 3 days later, the castle was dressed for a wedding. Not the grim political ceremony the elders had once demanded. A real one. And Elara stood before the mirror in a gown of white and gold. Tired, still healing. Still but happier than she had ever once believed a person like her was allowed to be. Her son slept in a cradle at her side. They had named him after his grandfather, a small grace a hand held out to a broken man, trying to become better, and the name suited him. A knock, and Cassian in the doorway, and the breath left her body. He wore, black and gold, the crown upon his dark hair, every inch the Alpha King the world knew. But when he looked at her, all of that fell away, and what was left was only the man. You look beautiful, he said. Elara flushed. I'm still healing. I hardly feel. You brought our son into the world with your own 2 hands. He crossed to her, took her hands in his. You have never been more beautiful than you are right now. He bent and kissed her soft. Ready, he murmured, to marry me for real. She smiled up at him. More than ready. They were married in the great hall, before nobles and elders, and the ordinary people of the kingdom, and Elara walked to the altar on her father's arm. Bramwell, upright now. Tears on his cheeks, a man given a second chance he had not earned and would spend the rest of his days trying to deserve. When her hand found Cassian's, it was like a current closing a circle. The priest spoke the old words, but Elara scarcely heard them. She saw only his eyes, winter blue, fixed on her, as though she were the single most precious thing the world had ever made. Do you take this man, the priest asked, as your husband, your Alpha, your king? I do, Elara said, and her voice did not shake. "And do you take this woman as your wife, your mate, your queen?" Cassian smiled. "I do," he said, "today and always." And he did not wait for permission. He drew her to him and kissed her deep and sure before the whole assembled world, and the hall erupted in a roar of joy that shook the ancient stones. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "My queen," he whispered. "My king," she whispered back. That night, when the last guest had gone, they lay together in their chamber with their son sleeping between them. And Cassian curled his arm around her from behind and pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About how everything changed," she said softly. "Not so long ago I was the woman no one would stand beside. And now—" She reached down and laid her hand over the tiny rise and fall of their sleeping son. "Now I'm a wife, a mother, a queen, and I have you." "You always had me," Cassian said, "from that very first night. It only took me far too long to understand it." She laughed low and warm and turned in his arms to face him. "Then we were two fools," she said, "because I didn't understand it either." He touched her face, gentle in the silver light. "You know what still astonishes me," he said. "I spent months searching the whole kingdom for you. And when I finally found you, I fell in love all over again, without ever knowing you were the same soul I'd been chasing." "Maybe it was meant to be," Elara whispered. "Maybe." He kissed her brow. "Or maybe you're simply impossible not to love." And outside their windows, the moon rose full and bright, the same moon that had once been used as a weapon against her, twisted into poison and shame. But tonight, it only poured its silver light across the three of them, gentle and clean blessing what it had once been made to break. Elara laid her head against her husband's chest and listened to the steady drum of his heart. "I love you," she said. "And I love you," Cassian answered. "Today, tomorrow, and every day that's left to us." And Elara, who had been cast out and whispered about and called ruined by everyone who was supposed to love her, closed her eyes and understood at long last that she was Hamesia, not in a castle, not in a crown, but in the arms of a man who had learned to see her true worth, and in the small, warm weight of a child who would grow up knowing every single day of his life that his mother had been the strongest person in any room she ever walked into. The whispers had been wrong about her. They always had been. And it had taken her a long, hard road to learn the one thing she would never again forget, that no one, no father, no sister, no crowded, cruel, glittering hall gets to decide what you are worth. Only you do. And Elara at last had decided.